Hi again. Last time we read chapters 1 and 2 of The Littles. Do you remember who the characters are so far? That's right, there are two families. The first family would be the Littles. And so far what we know about the Littles are there's Mr. and Mrs. Little, there's Granny Little, there's Tom who's 10 years old, and there's Lucy who's 8 years old. Then there is the Big family. We know there's a Mr. and Mrs. Big, and we know there's a Henry Big. We also, I forgot about this one, but there's an Uncle Pete who lives with the Littles as well. So those are the characters that we know so far. At the end of chapter 2, Lucy was very concerned about a cat moving in with the family who was renting the house out for 3 months on vacation. Now I want you to think about that. Why would the Little family be afraid of a cat? Chapter 3. There was a secret lookout place behind the light switch in the hall of the Big's house. One of the screws was missing. The empty hole was large enough for a Little to look and listen through. Mr. Little spent all the next day at the lookout place. Tom Little stayed with him. They were waiting for the Newcombs. Remember, the Newcombs are the new family that's coming in for the 3 months. When they come, be careful of that light switch, Tom, said Mr. Little. Likely as not, the first thing they'll do is turn on the hall light. Sometime in the late afternoon, Mr. Little thought he heard a noise. He looked through the hole. Are they coming? Asked Tom. Not yet. Hold it. Mr. Little heard a key in the front door lock. Yes, here they come now. Shh. Where's the hall light, Charlie? It was a woman's voice. I have it, said Charles Newcomb. There were sparks inside the lookout place as the light was turned on. Tom Little jumped. His father turned from the peephole and put his fingers to his lips. Shh. The bright light from the hall came through the peephole into their dark hiding place. Tom could see his father's face clearly. Mr. Little returned to the hole. I'll show you the picture that they've showed us so far. You can see them looking. There's the dad, and there's Tom. What a drive, said Mrs. Newcomb. She sat down heavily on the suitcase. Give me a minute to rest, and I'll help you with the rest of the bags. No need to help, Mrs. N, said Mr. Newcomb. I'll get the bags myself. No tipping, please. It's part of the service here at the Big's Summer Hotel. Mrs. Newcomb laughed. Where do you get the energy from? She said. From the country, said Mr. Newcomb. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it. I get energy from just looking at all the trees and space. We're going to be here 3 months. Think of it. I am, said Mrs. Newcomb. I'll still have to get 3 meals a day, only now it'll be in a strange kitchen. Listen, Liz, said Mr. Newcomb, you've come here to write, and I've come here to paint. Nothing else is important. Sure, Mrs. Newcomb laughed. Tell me that after eating hamburger for a week. I mean it, Liz, said Mr. Newcomb. Forget about housework. Write those stories you want to write. As for me, he twirled around and he did a little dance. This isn't my house. I'm fixing nothing and I'm doing nothing. If the faucets drip, let them drip. I may not even take out the garbage. You really mean it, don't you? Said Mrs. Newcomb. Sure I do, said Mr. Newcomb. I'm here to paint masterpieces, and that's what I'm going to do. I'll loaf, sit in the sun, I'll eat. He laughed. Hamburgers, of course. Chapter 4. A week had passed. Uncle Pete thought it was a bad beginning. It looks as though Newcomb means what he says. This place is a mess since they came. He pushed his plate away and threw down his napkin. And I am getting tired of hamburger. No matter, said Mr. Little. It'll be over one day and the Bigs will return. No harm done. Something bad will come of it. You'll see, said Uncle Pete. Well, at least they don't have a cat, said Lucy Little. That's right, said Mrs. Little. She smiled at her family. Lucy is looking on the bright side. Things could be worse. Bah, said Uncle Pete. Right now I'd rather have trouble with a cat than eat this cooking. Sounds like they're tired of hamburger, doesn't it? I suppose I should have learned to cook, said Mrs. Little. She looked around the table. Mrs. Big was such a good cook. It didn't seem necessary for me to cook too. I guess she spoiled us. All the Littles nodded. Suddenly, Granny Little spoke. Watch out for mice. Why do you say that, Granny? Said Mr. Little. There are no mice in this house. George Big wouldn't stand for it. Granny Little looked sharply at Mr. Little. There will be mice, she said. Then she straightened the shawl on her shoulders. Don't worry, Granny, said Mr. Little. You're thinking of the old days. There is nothing like the old days.